Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Mahoney. I'm an accredited financial counselor, and today we're going to be talking about 2025 retirement considerations. Now, we're going to talk about some different topics that you may or may not be familiar with, and I'm going to break it down for you so that this will be really easy to understand and digest. But first, I have to read a disclaimer. This presentation, whether it's live streamed, or on demand, is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. The concepts and strategies shared are intended to inform and empower, but may not be suitable for your specific circumstances. Consult with a team of qualified financial, tax, and legal professionals, including but not limited to registered investment advisors, accredited financial counselors, CPAs, enrolled agents, and estate planning and elder law attorneys who can provide personalized advice tailored to your unique needs. Any references to specific companies, products, or services are for illustrative purposes only and do not constitute endorsements. Investment involves risk, and examples presented are not a warranty of results. By participating in or viewing this content, you agree to assume full responsibility for your financial decisions and outcomes based on the information provided. So, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about how many sources of income and some considerations that you need to think about for retirement. We'll talk about tax-favored retirement investing options, some pitfalls to avoid to maximize progress, some additional considerations that you may want to think about. We'll talk about the Secure Act 2.0 and more. So let's talk about three major questions that my clients tend to think about. The first question is, will I run out of money? The second question is, will I be a burden on my children? And then the third question is, what type of legacy should I leave? As I just mentioned, there are some considerations that we tend to think about as we get closer to retirement. One is, will I have enough money for retirement? Two is, will I be a burden on my children? And usually that is related to long-term care needs, because as we get older, we know that 71% of individuals who reach the age of 65 are likely going to need some form of long-term care support, whether it is with eating, bathing, dressing, remembering to take your pills, whatever that looks like for you as you get older and may need that support. And usually it is the families, the adult children, who end up taking care of their parents. So that is a huge expense. It's also a lot of support when it comes to trying to juggle schedules. And then finally, the last item is, what kind of legacy do I want to leave for my adult children and maybe grandchildren? When we think about the income sources that we have, and it depends on where you are, it's never too late to generate income sources. Perhaps you worked at a private company where there are still pension options available, or perhaps you were federal or military, meaning you are collecting a FERS pension, also known as annuity, or perhaps CSRS, that is the other federal retirement system. If you are military, you may be collecting a pension and perhaps have a disability rating. Usually another source of income is Social Security. And when we combine those two sources of income, we make up the difference for what we need in retirement based on our retirement investments. And that could look like IRAs, perhaps in the private sector 401k, and in federal or military service, it could be the thrift savings plan. So to be clear, you could have as many as three sources of income, right? And I mentioned the pension, which is also an annuity. It is a regular employer payment to employees at or above the official retirement age and to designated beneficiaries, depending on how you set it up in retirement. The thrift savings plan, just like the 401k, this is a retirement savings and investment plan. And in the case of the federal government, it was set up in 1986 for federal employees and members of the uniformed services, including the Ready Reserve. And then finally, we have Social Security. Now, this was created by the Social Security Act in 1935. It provides income and health insurance to retired persons, the disabled, the poor, and other groups. So now we're going to turn to the tax-favored retirement investing options that you have and the different qualified retirement plans that you may already have or can still consider using. So when we talk about retirement investing, one of the major qualifiers is that you must have earned income in order to be able to put that money into retirement accounts. If you receive a windfall of some kind, whether it's a large monetary gift or perhaps an inheritance, you won't be able to take advantage of the retirement plan. If you want to do something with that and invest it, you can open a brokerage account, which is an investment account that is not in a retirement plan. And many will open an online account with Vanguard, Fidelity, or Schwab, or your company of choice, and put that money in there and choose investments. We're going to focus on what you can do with the earned income that you have. So there are two major types of plans we're going to discuss today. One is the individual retirement arrangement, also known as an individual retirement account or an IRA. And if you have an employer, the employer may have a sponsored plan that you can invest in. And so that may be a 401k, 403b, 457b, and for those in federal service or the uniformed services, it may be the thrift savings plan. And then associated with each of those types of plans, you can take advantage of the traditional versus the Roth or both. Okay, we're going to focus on the IRA first. Now for 2025, the contribution limit is $7,000 per individual with a $1,000 catch-up for anyone age 50 and over. And for a married household, what you have is you've got the single, you also have a spouse gets to have $7,000 contribution limit with a $1,000 catch-up, and that's regardless if the spouse has earned income. You can actually open the account with the total household income. The spouse is totally providing value to the household even if they're not bringing in earned income. Now, we should talk about the differences between traditional and Roth because these are the options that you have available to you. For the traditional, you can set up a pre-tax contribution through payroll so that before deductions are made from your paycheck, that money is deposited to the traditional IRA. What that means is you're going to lower your reportable taxable income for the current tax year, and then in retirement, all of the contributions as well as the growth based on the investments that you have chosen, all of that will be taxed on withdrawal. You can start to withdraw from the IRA as early as age 59 and a half. If you choose not to, that's fine because you want it to grow as long as possible. You will have to withdraw in retirement starting at age 73. And so that is a forced withdrawal because the government wants you to pay taxes. And that is called a required minimum distribution. It starts at age 73 and goes up every year. Now, for the Roth, it's different. So you are taking the tax hit now on your current income. You are depositing funds into the Roth IRA, either from your checking or savings. You are choosing investments, and that contribution and growth are never taxed on withdrawal. In fact, you don't even have to withdraw because you already pay taxes now. The government doesn't want your money from the Roth IRA because there's nothing to get. Now, the Roth IRA must be a qualified account in order for you to withdraw from it. And what does that mean? Two things must be true. First of all, the Roth IRA must be open for 5 years or more. And secondly, you must be age 59 and a half. Those two things must be true. With the Roth IRA, there are income limits. What that means is that if you make too much money, you will not be able to open the Roth IRA directly. We are going to discuss some alternatives to that so that you can still have a Roth IRA. Also, I want you to be aware that with the IRA, you have lots of investment choices. And so what that means is you, as the individual, are opening this account. And how do you do that? You go to a provider or a company, a brokerage company, such as Vanguard, Fidelity, or Schwab, or your company of choice. You will open an IRA, and you can decide whether it's traditional or Roth, and then you will put the money in there. You will then choose the investment so that it can grow over time. So lots of investment options are available. And also, as you see on the slide, you can open an IRA and still contribute to your employer-sponsored plan. And we're going to discuss more of that. Okay, let's talk about these different employer-sponsored plans that you may be a part of, or maybe you will be a part of. So this applies to a lot of different plans that are available through your employer. The 2025 contribution limits are much higher than the IRA. So for this year, it's $23,500. There are two different catch-up options depending on your age. And this is the year in which you turn a certain age. So for example, if you are a December baby and you are turning 50, you can start contributing the catch-up amount in addition to the regular contribution limit as early as that first pay period of the year. And so you would take that $31,000, divide it by the total number of paychecks that you get in that year, and then you can max it out for that year. If you are 64 and over, the same thing applies. Now, there are these magical ages of 60, 61, 62, and 63, where you can contribute up to 150% of that original catch-up amount of $7,500. So it is $11,250 that you can contribute the year in which you turn those ages, in addition to the regular contribution limit. So what do we mean by all these different letters and numbers? So the IRS tax code, the Internal Revenue Code, defines how investments are treated based on the type of employer you are working for. So we've heard of 401k. And so if you're working in the private sector, that will be available to you. If you're in the public sector, in public schools or nonprofits or hospitals, it'll be called a 403b. If you're working for a state or local government, that'll be a 457b. Essentially, these are all employer-sponsored plans. Now, as I mentioned before, we talked about with the IRA, you have traditional and Roth options. You may have traditional and Roth options available with your employer-sponsored plan. And perhaps you have been job hopping, which there's nothing wrong with that. That means you get to increase your experience as well as your income every time you make a move. You may have a string of old 401ks or other employer-sponsored plans, and it can be a lot to keep up with. What you can do with those old plans is you can perform a direct rollover either into an IRA, and you want to keep it like for like. So if it was a traditional 401k, you want a traditional IRA. If it was a Roth 403b, you want it to go from that into the Roth IRA. Okay? So you have the option of moving it into an IRA, or you can also move it directly into the current plan under your new employer. And so those are the two options available to you, and that'll allow you to manage your different retirement plans all under one, or at least to minimize the number that you have to manage. Now, we talked about the forced withdrawal, also known as the required minimum distribution, or RMD, at age 73. With the Roth employer-sponsored plan, there are no income limits, okay? What that means is you can go all Roth in your employer-sponsored plan and you don't have to worry about making too much money, okay? Remember, this is the after-tax option that you get to contribute to now so that later in retirement you don't pay taxes when you withdraw, okay? So let's talk about the TSP on the next slide. Okay, if you are a federal employee or if you are in the military, you are going to have the Thrift Savings Plan as a retirement investment option sponsored by your employer. As you can see, the contributions limits are the same. You can contribute as much as $23,500 per year, and depending on the age in which you're going to turn for that year, you can contribute as much as $7,500 extra, or perhaps if you're turning ages 60, 61, 62, or 63, you can contribute as much as $11,250 in addition to the regular limit. So let's talk about the different options. Remember, we talked about traditional being pre-tax and Roth being after tax. Those two options are available inside the TSP, and you can do one or the other or both. Now, the TSP looks very different in terms of investment options. You have 5 core funds. The F fund is a fixed fund based on a bond index, and G is for government securities. These are very low risk, low reward, and by themselves will not really outpace inflation or double your investments hardly at all. Okay, you also have 3 other funds that are invested in the stock market. You have the C fund, which is the common stock index fund. That is based on the S&P 500. This is the Standard & Poor's top 500 medium and large companies that, when put together in that index fund, give us an idea of how well the U.S. stock market is doing. We also have the S fund. These are the small cap stocks, the small companies that are fairly aggressive. They go up and down just like investments do. And then we have the international stock index, which are based on certain overseas funds. And when you combine investing in CS&I in any proportion, you're covering the entire stock market. Now, if you're not comfortable making these selections, I get it, right? You have another option available to you. The TSP has established life cycle funds, which is a combination of all 5 funds with a specific target date that either ends in a 5 or a 0. So it could be 2055 or 2060. And these funds start out being very aggressive, which means that 99% are invested in a combination of the CS&I funds with 1% in F&G. Every 3 months, this life cycle fund automatically adjusts to become more and more conservative. Now, I would encourage you to please check into what your life cycle fund looks like and what the proportions are, because as you're getting closer to retirement, you may not want to be as conservative as what's listed, and you can make some adjustments. The other option that you have is a mutual fund window. This was introduced by the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board to give TSP participants more investment options. Now, those come with their own separate fees, so just be aware of that, because they didn't want to impact the other participants who are taking advantage of either the life cycle or the 5 core funds. Now, in order to invest in the mutual fund window, you have to have a minimum of $10,000 in your plan, and you can contribute no more than 25% of your total balance into the mutual fund window. Now, the other thing you should be aware of is, because we're talking about traditional and Roth, that traditional is still subject to RMD at age 73. That's that forced withdrawal for everything in the traditional side of the TSP. With the Roth, as I've mentioned previously, that Roth has no income limits when it comes to an employer-sponsored plan. Okay, you don't have to worry about those income limits. So if you want, you can max out the Roth. And when you do that, that is the after-tax dollars going into the account, and then you have no taxes on the withdrawal in retirement. Now, the other thing I want to address is for many employers, including such as the TSP, many employers will offer a match, and that is an incentive for you to get free money based on what percentage you end up contributing. So, for example, now this applies in the Thrift Savings Plan to the FERS, Federal Employees Retirement System participants. These are your civilian federal employees, and also the Blended Retirement System, BRS, military participants. For those who for those military members who are in the legacy option, there is no match, although you still can invest in the TSP, and that's because your pension looks different from BRS participants. So let's take a look at this portion of the slide. Now, if you decide never to contribute to the TSP, there will be an automatic 1% into the traditional by the government. When you decide to put in and put money into the TSP, and by the way, we know that folks who start in the federal government today are automatically enrolled at 5% into a life cycle fund. So you're automatically enrolled. Just be aware of that. That's to give you a kickstart into retirement investing. That first 3% of your contribution will be matched equally, so you get 3% back. And then the remaining 4th and 5th% that you put in will be matched at 0.5%. So when you're putting in that full 5%, you're getting that additional 5%. And if you decide to contribute all of your contributions into the Roth, because right now they're in traditional when you first started federal or military service, you can change it to all Roth, and that match that you get from the employer will always go into the traditional side of your employer-sponsored plan. The reason for that is that you will not be able to pay taxes on their contribution until you withdraw in retirement. So just be aware of that. And as I've mentioned before, you can contribute to the employer-sponsored plan and also open an IRA for the same year. So now we are going to talk about 5 pitfalls to avoid to maximize progress with your retirement investing. Now there are more, but I want to highlight these 5 in particular. Okay, we're talking about the first pitfall to avoid to maximize progress, and the first one is the hidden costs of fees. So there are going to be fees associated with investing, and this is not just retirement investing, but investing in general. And so what you see here on the right-hand side of the slide is a slide from Personal Finance Club. And what they're doing is they're comparing $10,000 that is invested into the S&P 500 over 40 years. And then if there were a 2% fee, that fee could erode your overall rate of return by as much as 55%. And why is that? Well, what happens is when, let's say, you take on a financial advisor of some kind, like a registered investment advisor, or perhaps a certified financial planner, a qualified licensed professional who can guide you through this process, they may charge an investment or an advisory fee of about 1%. And if there are additional fees, such as the annual operating fee, we know that, for example, the S&P 500 is really low, as are index funds, mutual funds, and exchange-traded funds, then those fees can add up over time. And just like your investments compound and grow and double over time, so does that fee. And that's why you can see that a 2% fee can actually erode your overall investment. So when somebody says, oh, I can do that for 1% and there's a 1% operating fee, also known as an expense ratio, that doesn't mean you get to keep 98% of your investment. It means that over time, especially over decades, you're going to lose your overall rate of return. And as you can see on the left, there are different types of fees. Some are based on a percentage of your balance. Some are flat fees. And so, for example, we talked about the operating fee. There might be an advisory fee or asset under management fee. There are fees also that are a percentage of how much you deposit when you purchase the investment, which is called a front end. They get you on the front end. And then there's also the back end where they charge you a percentage based on how much you sell. Now, you will not be charged a front end and back end. It's usually one or the other. There are also flat fees. So sometimes there's a transaction fee, or when you have an annual fee, or perhaps you're closing or terminating an account, there might be a fee associated with that as well. Okay, so another major pitfall that I would like for you to try to avoid in order to maximize progress is trying to time the market. So many people believe that they can time the market, and what that means is they can predict when there's going to be a market downturn and they jump out. They wait for that market downturn to happen, and then they jump back in while it's low in order to ride that wave back up. And it's a lot of time, energy, and effort to do that. And what I would recommend instead is to just stay in the market. And JP Morgan Asset Management has demonstrated that by staying fully invested, you get an overall better rate of return. And as you can see here, this is the performance of a $10,000 investment into the S&P 500 between January 1st, 2004 and December 29th, 2023. That's almost 20 years of data. And what this tells us is that by staying fully invested and riding those waves up and down, you get an overall rate of return that is much higher. Now, by trying to time the market, what we see is that there are lower rates of return, or in some cases, no rate of return at all. And this box tells us that 7 of the 10 best days occurred within 2 weeks of the 10 worst days, which means within 2 weeks of the 10 worst days happening, 7 of the 10 best days occurred. There really is no way to predict what's going to happen in the market. And if you can be patient and remind yourself emotionally that it's okay to ride this out and stay fully invested, that is where you're going to see the most rate of return. Now, in order to stay fully invested, you need a separate bucket of money to dip into when the market is down. This is why I recommend that you have either an online high-yield savings account or a money market account. These are just accounts that earn higher interest than your standard savings account, and they're flexible. You can access it at any time, and you're maintaining at least 2 to 3 years of survival expenses, because that's what financial advisors want you to have as you get closer to retirement. This is beyond the 3 to 6 months of survival expenses that ideally you would have in one of those types of accounts. Here is another pitfall I'd like for you to avoid to maximize progress, and that is the toxic effects of loans and withdrawals on your retirement future for your future self. One of the biggest challenges we have is planning for our future self, and we have a big lump sum that is needed. It could be a down payment for a house or perhaps another major milestone. And we tend to look to our retirement balances because we've accumulated 6 figures or more. And it's totally natural. So this This slide that you see from JP Morgan Asset Management illustrates what happens when you take loans and withdrawals from your retirement plan over time. So what we see is a 25-year-old with a starting salary of $30,000 that increases each year by 2.5%. This person is steadily contributing 5%, getting a 5% match, and they're invested 60% stocks, the S&P 500, and 40% in a bond fund. So 60-40 split. And we're talking about 40 years of investing. They accumulate $1.3 million for their future selves for retirement. And that's without taking out any loans or withdrawals. But as you can see in the bottom half, we see that in their early 30s, there was a withdrawal and then a loan, and they get to pay themselves back at a lower rate within their employer-sponsored plan and they may still be contributing. And then again, there's another loan at age 50 with a repayment period. And then finally withdrawal, because we know that at 59.5, you can withdraw penalty-free. By systematically having these reductions from your retirement plan, you're unplugging investments and not giving your retirement plan the opportunity to fully grow over time with those tax-favored options, whether it's traditional or Roth. What I would suggest instead is that you can find a balance and generate another large bucket of income. So in addition to having your retirement plan, consider opening a brokerage account. Remember, we talked about Vanguard, Fidelity, or Schwab, or your brokerage company of choice. Open an account, start putting money into that, and invest it over time. When you have that large need, whatever it is, dip into that brokerage account instead. Yes, it's taxable, but you can dip into that instead, and then you can preserve your retirement plan for retirement. The next pitfall to avoid is all about taxes at this point. So congratulations, you're retired and you're getting to that stage where you need to withdraw from your retirement plans because of the required minimum distribution. There is a steep penalty called an excise tax if you do not take a mandatory withdrawal. So right now, that is 25% of the amount that you were supposed to take out at the appropriate time. Once you correct that error, it would be dropped to 10% when it's corrected within 2 years. It used to be as high as 50%, and fortunately under the Secure Act 2.0, it dropped to 25%. So the way this works is you see this uniform lifetime table in front of you. This is what the IRS publishes. And so you would calculate your RMD by taking all of the traditional balances of your employer-sponsored plan and traditional IRAs, and then you would divide it by the distribution period according to your age. And you would do that at the end of the last year. Okay, so as of December 31st, this is where you look at all of your account balances. And you will need to follow certain RMD rules. So for the very first time you're doing an RMD, you do get to delay your first RMD until April 1st of the following year. You can then, and you should, take out the future RMDs by December 31st of the same year and then subsequent years going forward. And remember, you may have more than one traditional account, so you may need to calculate the RMD for each account, but the good news is if you have more than one IRA or a 403B plan, the IRS allows you to take your total IRA required minimum distribution from just one of them to cover all of them. If you have multiple 401ks or 457Bs, you have to pull that RMD from each account separately. And as you can see here, the RMD age changes. So in the year 2033, it increases from age 73 to age 75, which is when you'd have to start doing these RMD withdrawals. So the next thing I'd like to talk about that's related to taxes is paying too much taxes in general in retirement. because a lot of us want to take advantage of the tax favored options that we have available. And I want to show you a scenario of what that can look like. So what you see here is a 26-year-old with a starting average salary in 2024 of $63,795. They're going to start contributing at a rate of 15% and actually contribute 15% from age 26 to 62. And if it's on a monthly basis, it comes out to be almost $800. If it's biweekly, which is how many people get paid, it's $368 biweekly, or it averages out to $26.22 a day. The S&P 500 is what this person is investing in, which has averaged a 10.2% rate of return over the last 20 years. And actually, that's pretty low. We know that the S&P 500 has returned anywhere from 10 to 12%, so we're sticking to a more conservative amount. This person is going to invest for 36 years until the age of 62, based on the contributions, which are all traditional. Remember, these are pre-tax dollars going in and being invested, and it will grow tax deferred. So for 36 years invested in the S&P 500 for the federal military and military members, this would be the C fund. You're looking at a total contribution amount of $344,000 approximately, with an overall total savings of $3 million. This is between the contributions and the growth. Okay, so we just saw how the balance built to $3 million, right? Person 26 to 62 invested 15% of their income over time. By the way, that did not include the match, and there's a $3 million balance just by investing in the S&P 500. So what we're looking at now is we're going to fast forward to the RMD ages. And so the person on the left, their RMD age is 73. And because they retired at 62, they took that balance. We're making the assumption that there were no withdrawals from the retirement plans. There's no longer a contribution, and instead of investing in the S&P 500, financial advisors want you to invest at 7%. Usually this is a mixture of stocks and bonds. And so for the next 11 years until the age of 73, you would see that the balance as of December 31st is $6.3 million. And based on the IRS's table, the distribution period is 26.5. We divide by that distribution period. The required minimum distribution for by April 1st of the following year is $238,335.78. This is more than what many people make in a year, and this would all be taxable because you took advantage of the traditional side where it's pre-tax dollars going in. So now this is the amount that you'll need to withdraw and pay taxes on. On the right-hand side, what we see is that instead of investing for 11 years, this person's RMD age is actually 75. So those additional 2 years, that 13 years of investing with no additional contributions, with a mixture of stocks and bonds at 7% rate of return, is going to grow from 3 million to 7.2 million. We know from that uniform lifetime table from the IRS that we would divide by 24.6, and the RMD is almost $294,000. What we have here between both of these scenarios is called a rich people's problem, and this is what one of my clients said to me. So let's talk about how to prevent these high tax bills in retirement. Okay, so let's discuss 3 common tax mitigation strategies, and the idea behind this is that we know that Roth is excluded from all RMD calculations. So the more Roth balance, or the higher the Roth balance we can have, the lower we would have in your traditional accounts. And so I've listed 3 common strategies, but there are more. And it's really important that you take the time to consult with a qualified, licensed financial professional to get personalized recommendations. So that way you can come up with the best strategy based on your needs. So we're going to start on the left because this is the easiest step that you can take starting today. This would be to suspend your traditional contributions, either in whole or part, and instead of contributing to traditional, you would contribute to Roth. What this does is you'll still have that traditional balance and it'll continue to grow, but now you're creating a the Roth side of that plan, so that way you can minimize how much is going to be contributed to your traditional, so it won't grow nearly as fast. Remember, when you are contributing to an employer-sponsored plan on the Roth side, there are no income limits like there are with the Roth IRA. So what that means is you can take advantage of that full amount if you can afford to do so, plus the catch-up limit, and it's all being excluded from that RMD calculation. Remember that the match that you get based on your contributions to that plan will still go to the traditional. And yes, there will be tax consequences now, so you may want to consult with a tax professional to determine what those consequences are. But once you start doing this, remember, you're preparing your future self to have fewer taxes in retirement. So it's definitely a judgment call. In the middle of the slide, we're talking about contributing to a Roth IRA. So for many of us, if you don't make too much money, and you would need to consult with the IRS's website because that changes from year to year based on whether you file as a single filer or married filing jointly, you would need to look at those limits. So if you don't make too much money, you can go to a brokerage company such as Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, whomever, open a Roth IRA, deposit funds from your account, whether it's checking or savings, and then choose investments. So that way it'll grow over time. And again, this is adding to your Roth. So for those of you who do make too much money a year, you can open what's called a backdoor Roth IRA. And yes, I know it sounds shady, and I promise it is not shady. So the way to do this would be to open a traditional IRA. Again, you would do that through a brokerage company of your choice, whether it's Schwab, Fidelity, Vanguard, whomever. You would deposit funds into that traditional IRA. And what some instructions that I've seen say is that you have to let the account settle. You would then convert that traditional to Roth. And remember that Roth is already funded with after-tax funds from your account, right? Once that conversion is complete and the system of that brokerage company has accepted it from being traditional to Roth, then you can go ahead and choose your investments so that they will grow over time. And if you're interested in step-by-step instructions with screenshots for Vanguard, Fidelity, or Schwab, you can get those instructions by going to a shared Google Drive, and I'll share those resources with you at the end so that you can find that. The third option that you can also consider doing is a Roth conversion. So this is where you're taking existing funds from your employer-sponsored plan and you're moving them, doing a direct rollover into a traditional IRA, and then when you convert that traditional IRA to Roth, that triggers a taxable event, and you'll need to pay taxes on that amount. And to do that, you would have to use it with whatever savings that you have. You cannot take advantage of your retirement accounts to do that. And so when you do that, you're going to have to be very mindful, and you can work with a qualified professional, whether it's a finance professional or a tax professional, who can help you look at the current tax bracket that you're in, what the ceiling is, and what your income is. The difference between the income and your ceiling is the safe amount that you can do a direct rollover and do that Roth conversion. Because if you exceed that ceiling, you're actually going into the next tax bracket, and you don't necessarily want to pay more taxes on that, right? So that's an annual event that you can do. And like I said, I'll be sharing some more resources with you at the end. Now we're going to discuss some additional considerations, all of which will be the foundation for you to be ready for retirement. So what we know is that the basis of success with your money is to make sure that it is managed effectively. And this is something that you can do at any stage of your financial journey. So you can review your net worth. What does that look like? There is one side of a page, if you can visualize it, where we list everything that you own and everything that has a value assigned to it. All of your account balances, the value of your vehicles and other items that you have, your house, if you have one, anything that you're investing in, all of that counts as an asset. On the opposite side of the page, we would list anything that you owe to anybody, regardless of the interest rate. When we calculate the difference between what you own and what you owe, so assets minus liabilities, that gives you your total net worth. Now, the best way to determine where your money is going is to map your cash flow. And when I sit down with clients, we sit down and look at their current situation and we focus on some very basic items. And we determine what their current income is, what their expenses are, and how much they have left over. And then we do a second scenario where we project what their retirement income is and what their expenses will be. And so, for example, if they've paid off their mortgage, right, the expenses might be less. It just depends. And so these three things you can do yourself. And I have some tools that are available on a Google Share Drive that I'll share with you at the end. So we know that another way to be ready for retirement is to avoid debt to build wealth or to minimize it as much as possible. So one of the things that you can do is if you're interested, you can focus on power paying your debt. And so there's a video called Deal with Debt Your Way that you can watch where you can learn two very popular methods on how to DIY your debt payments to eliminate debt, or you can seek assistance. And I've listed some qualified options available to you. So the basis of paying off debt is to figure out, remember we just talked about mapping cash flow, figure out what your extra is, find your fluff. This is leftover money after all of your obligations have been met. And then you need to choose your strategy in terms of if once you list all of your debt, what do you value more, right? You're going to choose one option to pay off your debt, and you're going to commit to that plan and continue to do it until you pay it off and keep track of it, right? There's a really great tool that's available. Again, I have it in the Google Share Drive that I'll share with you at the end, that once you list all of the debt except for the mortgage, you list all of the debt, it can give you a month and year for when all of your debt will be paid off using this debt elimination plan. So you may have heard me mention before that as you get closer to retirement, financial advisors want you to have 2 to 3 years of cash saved. A lot of financial advisors, by the way, will want to invest it, but remember that defeats the purpose of keeping cash saved outside of retirement for when there are market downturns. So what you would start with is having an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months of survival expenses. And we know the importance of having an emergency fund because it can help prevent us from taking out loans or using credit cards during any sort of unexpected event. And what does that look like when we talk about survival expenses? Well, we're talking about all of your housing and utilities, your food, you have to eat, you need transportation, and then of course your health and self-care, right? Everything that you need to live, work, and stay healthy is what you want to map out and figure out what you have on a monthly basis. You multiply that by 3 or 6, that gets you to that emergency fund. And then you'll want to expand that even further as you get closer to retirement by saving up 2 to 3 years of cash. And you heard me say before, this amount of money is not trivial, and it should go into an online high yield savings account or a money market account, not an investment. Remember, these accounts are very flexible. They earn a higher rate of interest. And depending on how much you have in there, you could be earning a lot of money per week or per month and per year. Okay, so definitely consider doing that because cash is king. Something else that is really going to help you is when you protect yourself from catastrophic expenses. And there are 9 types of insurance that I recommend. And there are a couple of videos that you can watch. One is called Insurance, What You Need and What You Don't. And this is where I cover the 9 types in more detail. And then every year I do post a video on insurance considerations for 2025. And I usually post that for open enrollment season when we are talking specifically about health insurance and the tax favored options associated with those health insurance plans. Now, I am going to go over the 9 types here, but you will need to find those videos and go into more deep dive detail. So the first one that you see is health insurance. That's very important. We know that bankruptcy is the #1 cause of debt in the US, even for those with health insurance. Auto insurance is really important, as well as either homeowners or renters insurance. An umbrella policy can be bundled with your auto and homeowners or renters insurance. It's additional liability coverage that will protect you from any catastrophic expenses, and it's really inexpensive per year. The middle icon is identity theft protection and restoration. So this will help you anytime there have been data breaches and they assign a case manager to you in order to deal with that mess. The next one is long-term care insurance. Remember, this is one of the key questions that many have as they get closer to retirement. You know, am I going to be a burden on my children when they're trying to raise my grandchildren, especially if I need support for bathing, eating, or dressing, or anything like that. And then the last 3 types you may be able to drop in retirement. That would be term life insurance. And so term life insurance is for those who rely on your income. Once you have paid off your debt and you have accumulated quite a bit in your retirement and other accounts, you may become what's called self-insured and you won't need a life insurance product anymore. And so what you see on the right by Personal Finance Club is an example of what happens when you get permanent life insurance, whether it's whole life, universal life, index universal life, and so forth. So what many insurance companies will sell you is a much more expensive policy for whole life insurance because they tell you about how there's a cash value that builds up inside the policy. And what they're doing is they're investing, but then they're also, this is a very high commission product because there are sales commissions, there are fees that you don't necessarily see, and then what you're left with may not be as high value in terms of that cash value as if you could go ahead and directly invest yourself, right? And so that is what this shows. And what they don't tell you with these permanent life insurance products that build a cash value is that if you don't do something with that cash value, when you pass as the policy holder, that cash value goes back to that company, and the original beneficiary amount, let's say it was $500,000, that goes to your beneficiaries. So they get that death benefit. And so that is something to consider. And then another one that you may be able to drop in retirement is called long-term disability insurance. The idea behind long-term disability is that it replaces a large portion of your income, right, when you were working. And when you're retired, you won't need that anymore. And then finally, you want to consider professional liability insurance. And a lot of that has to do with your roles and responsibilities in your job. It could be dangerous, especially if you were in law enforcement or military or an air traffic controller, or perhaps you were a manager or are a manager and you want to, you have hiring responsibilities or perhaps assignment responsibilities, right, that make you subject to litigation. Basically, this liability insurance for professionals is designed to help you with errors or omissions, and it pays for attorney's fees and up to anywhere from $1 million to $3 million in coverage. So these are the 3 items I suggest, or the 3 items you may want to drop in retirement, but the 9 items are something you should definitely consider having. Now, when we talk about retirement, sometimes we may need to access our funds early. Okay, so there is a pecking order that many financial advisors will talk to you about. Generally speaking, they want you to access all taxable funds first, and then you'll eventually go to tax favored options, and then the Roth of anything should be last. This slide from Personal Finance Club provides you with 6 ways to access retirement funds early. And so we know that in order to access your retirement funds, you normally have to be 59 and a half to avoid that 10% tax penalty. Now, if you have that brokerage account that I had mentioned before to dip into, that would be the first thing that you could do if you were going to retire before the age of 59 and a half. Another great option is if you've thought about this, perhaps you have invested in real estate or you have other passive income that you can tap into. That would be something else. Perhaps you sell one of your investment properties. The third item is that you can access your Roth IRA principal. Now, this is the contributions you can withdraw from your Roth IRA without a tax penalty. There is also something called a Roth conversion ladder. You may have heard of a CD ladder. A CD ladder is where some people will put money into a certificate of deposit and they'll wait a year or whatever the term is, they'll put more money in every so often, and then as each one matures, they have a string of others that are still being invested in the CD. This is a very similar principle where you could convert a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA each year, and you're generating that Roth income each year as it becomes available. Remember that Roth has to be at least 5 years old or older, and you have to be 59 and a half. So that might be an option as well, just to start generating that income as soon as it becomes available, because that Roth has to be 5 years old or older. Now, the 5th option is called Rule 72T. This refers to the IRS tax code, and this is where you can have scheduled equal periodic payments, SEPP. And this can start as early as age 55, and it would run to 59 and a half, where you would schedule reasonable withdrawal amounts from your retirement plans. Now, the last one is called the Rule of 55. This is where you can access your retirement accounts. And when I say retirement accounts, I need to specify this is your most recent employer-sponsored plan. It could be your 401k, your TSP, whoever your most recent employer is, whatever balance you have available, you can access that in the calendar year that you turn 55 when you leave your job for any reason. Okay, so when you're 55 and you leave your job, you can access your most recent employer plan. All right, so if you have taken advantage of doing direct rollovers into your current plan, you may have a larger balance to access. And so that gives you an option to access it as early as age 55. All right, so now we're going to talk about some key changes and updates from the Secure Act 2.0. So there have been some wonderful updates. And so I think I mentioned this before, that there is a reduced penalty, that there was an excise tax that was reduced from 50% to 25% of the amount that you should have withdrawn, or the amount that has yet to be withdrawn as part of that RMD. And remember, it drops to 10% once it's corrected within 2 years. And we also discussed the RMD ages. We know that in 2023, it was deemed to be 73, and in 2033, that age will be 75. Remember, when we talk about the Roth side of your employer-sponsored plan, there is no RMD. So it used to be that you had to withdraw from those plans, but not anymore. And it can be treated the same as a Roth IRA. It gets excluded, of course, from those RMD calculations. Now, there is also a great option for parents who have taken advantage of the 529 type of education savings account for their children. So when you have a 529 plan that is 15 years old or older, and you have excess funds that are available because your kids don't need it anymore, or perhaps there's no longer a need for it, each beneficiary can have money contributed from the 529 plan into a Roth IRA, and there's a lifetime cap per beneficiary of $35,000, and it is subject to the annual contribution limits. So let's say, I'm a family of 4, right? And let's say that I have, this is probably not going to happen, but let's say I have $140,000 left over from my 2 boys going to college. And I want to move that money over, do a direct rollover to Roth IRAs. What I would do is I would start with one of my children and do that $7,000 contribution or direct rollover, because that is the contribution limit for the year. And I would do that for each child and do that for the next 5 years. So that is how I would get to $35,000 for my oldest, $35,000 for my youngest, $70,000 is done. I can change my beneficiary to my husband and do the same thing for 5 years at $7,000, or since he's 50 or over 50, that could be $8,000 per year, right? As long as I don't exceed that $35,000 limit. And then finally, I can change the beneficiary to myself and do the same thing. Okay, so it's a great opportunity for parents who are concerned about over-contributing to their 529 plans. Now, there's also provision where the surviving spouse can elect to be treated as the participant for determining RMD ages and amounts for any inherited retirement plans. There's also another provision when it comes to emergency access. So these are all optional provisions because the Secure Act 2.0 had both optional and mandatory provisions. So these provisions that are optional that you'll need to check directly with your employer include terminal illness, a qualified disaster, an emergency savings fund. If you are a domestic abuse victim, you can take out as much as $10,000. And if you require an emergency personal expense of $1,000. So there's certain limitations, there's certain limits as well as certain qualifications for each of those options. Now, I mentioned toward the beginning that there are higher catch-up limits for ages 60 to 63, which is 150% of the catch-up amount for any given year. And for 2025, that amount is $11,250. Now, at some point, we believe it might be 2026, there might be a mandated Roth catch-up amount for when you're 50 and over. So what that means is, depending on your income, if your wages are greater or equal to $145,000 in the previous year, your catch-up contributions would go to the Roth only. Okay, so that is something that we're still waiting to see, and it's going to require quite a bit of HR system programming, and we'll wait for more information on that. Another opportunity that hasn't been fulfilled yet is where the employer can provide Roth contributions, right? So right now we know that the employer match always goes to the traditional. They're talking about having it go to Roth. There are some tax consequences associated with that, and so it would require you as the employee to increase your withholding to offset those taxes. We're still waiting on more information. And finally, there is another alternative for TSP plan participants only. In 2026, you will be able to convert part or all of your traditional TSP to the Roth TSP. Okay, this is an in-plan conversion. You will not be able to use your TSP funds to pay for those taxes. You will need savings, and there are some other eligibility requirements. These are all of the provisions that I want to highlight out of the 99 that were made under the Secure Act 2.0. We are in the final stretch, so there are more options to consider when it comes to Medicare, Social Security, and other questions you should be asking yourselves. And remember, your retirement journey is unique, so don't measure your progress using someone else's ruler. So when we talk about Medicare, Medicare is the primary insurer for those who are turning age 65. What happens is Medicare provides 80% coverage. You are responsible for the remaining 20%. And there are different parts and pieces to Medicare depending on which option you choose. So if you choose the OG, Original Medicare, it consists of three main parts. One is hospital admissions, that's Part A. That has been funded through your payroll deduction, and you don't have to pay for that in retirement. Part B is outpatient, meaning doctor's appointments and other durable equipment that you may need. And then Part D are prescriptions. Now for Parts B and D, you are required, or you will be required, to pay premiums for that per month. And that's per individual, because you each individually within the household enroll into Medicare. And so that amount, the Parts B and D premium amounts, are determined based on your income from 2 years prior that were reported to the IRS. So for example, if you are enrolling in Medicare in, let's say, the year 2026, your 2024 tax returns would determine the cost of the premiums for both of those. And then finally, some people, because they have that 20% coverage that they need to provide, they acquire a Medigap plan through a private insurance company to cover that remaining 20%. So those first four options are part of the original Medicare plan. There are advantages to that. So for example, everybody takes Medicare. You don't have to worry about being approved to see a specialist. You can go to whomever you want. The fifth option that you see is Part C, Medicare Part C, also known as Medicare Advantage. And so this is where you would enroll with a private insurance company for Medicare coverage. And many people like that because they are familiar with their plan that they had, and so they might go with the same company who provides a Medicare Advantage. Now, some of the benefits of Medicare Advantage include dental coverage and vision coverage, or hearing coverage, and so those are covered or may be covered through the plan. You'd have to read the health plan brochure, whereas some of those options are not available in Medicare. At the Advantage plan, you actually will need approval to see specialists, right? So because that's how that system works. So there are pros and cons to each one, and you would need to explore those to determine what's best for you. And the best way to do that is to find your state health insurance assistance program, also known as SHIP. This is unbiased local one-on-one Medicare counseling where they can educate you on your different options. And so to find your state's state health insurance assistance program, you would go to shiphelp.org and click on your state. And this is totally free. It is funded by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and this is Medicare counseling done at the state level. Okay, now let's talk about enrollment and costs a little bit more detailed. So typically people would enroll usually within a 7-month window around their 65th birthday. And this starts 3 months before their birthday all the way to 3 months after. If you have TRICARE, because of your service, you will need to enroll into Medicare at 65. There is no option to defer it, even if you are working. And that's because TRICARE does not want to be the primary insurer anymore. They want Medicare to take that over. If you are working, you can technically delay enrollment because you are enrolled in a qualifying healthcare plan under your employer. And so you can delay as long as you want. And then once you finally retire, you will have an 8-month period or window to go ahead and enroll into Medicare. If you are not working and you don't meet that 65th birthday deadline, that 7-month window, there is a penalty associated with that, which will increase the Parts B and D premiums. And remember, I said Parts B and D premiums are determined each year by your tax return income that was reported 2 years prior. That is called the Income-Related Monthly Adjustment Amount, also known as IRMA. Now, if you have a high deductible health plan with a health savings account, this is not a flexible spending account. You will need to make sure that you stop contributing to the HSA 6 months prior to enrolling into Medicare. And the reason for that is that the HSA is not compatible with Medicare in terms of it's not the right type of plan for you to continue to contribute. Of course, you can use it for all of your healthcare needs, and so you can do that, but you want to avoid a penalty for contributing to the HSA when your Medicare kicks in 6 months prior to your enrollment date. For those of you who are federal employees, you can choose to suspend your federal health insurance if you want, and suspending that coverage, not canceling, but suspending, allows you to re-enroll during open season or with a qualifying life event. It's totally up to you. Some federal employees actually choose to enroll in Part A, but not Parts B and D because they have health coverage as a benefit from retiring from the federal workforce. Okay, let's briefly discuss Social Security. Okay, so Social Security, you have a full retirement age based on the year that you were born, and that full retirement age guarantees a certain benefit amount. You are eligible to claim Social Security at age 62. That is the earliest that you can claim it. It won't be the same full benefit as what it would be based on your age, but in order to be eligible to claim Social Security, at a minimum, you have to have paid for 40 quarters or 10 years or more. You can enroll between ages 62 and 70. And if you enrolled and if you signed up for benefits from Social Security before age 65, so the Social Security Administration will go ahead and automatically enroll you in Medicare at age 65. You will not need to worry about that. So I strongly recommend that you get a benefits estimate and figure out exactly what your benefit options are based on when you enroll, anywhere from 62 to 70, because those benefits steadily increase, and that'll be part of your future income. So we do have more questions to consider. There's some foundational planning or review that you may need to do. Remember, we talked about cash flow, mapping that cash flow for current and retirement expenses. We talked briefly about how to protect your money from catastrophic expenses. How much debt do you still have that you want to pay off prior to retirement? Have you reached that fully funded emergency savings yet? And what does that legacy planning look like for you? Do you want to die with zero, Or do you want to leave some sort of legacy, a financial legacy beyond the values and work ethic and everything else that you have instilled in your adult children? And then another really important question is, what will you do in retirement? This is the most challenging part for people. It's not necessarily the financial part, it's determining what you will do with the time that you use to have purpose and meaning by going to work. So that 8-hour day plus the commuting time, what will you replace it with? And so this is where you get to sit down and write what you plan to do with your time and money in retirement. And you do that individually, and if you have a spouse, have your spouse do the same. And then you have a discussion, because some of those things will overlap and some of them won't, and that's okay. And then you should be able to determine if you're on track to retire comfortably with the goals that you have in mind for retirement. You want to make sure that you're reviewing and consulting, so make sure you know what your healthcare needs are and that you have a plan for that. Determine your long-term care needs. Maybe get long-term care insurance before the age of 60 or earlier, depending on your family health history. And then, how do you optimize your distribution? That is a lot of syllables to say, how do you navigate taxes in retirement? Right? So that is really important as well. Do you know when to convert to Roth, when to claim Social Security, which Medicare options are best for you, and with whom to consult? All right, so this is really important. I really want you to have a distinction between information and advice. You're going to take the time to determine what you're going to get for retirement and all the information that you need. You've got to do that first, okay? And then you take that information and you're going to find advice from a qualified, licensed, or certified individual, okay? So remember to start with, for example, maybe you have a retirement benefit specialist and they're going to give you an estimate of benefits if you're collecting a pension from your employer. One of the things you should not do is say, "Thank you so much for telling me how much I'm going to get per month. What should I do with it?" That is not the thing to ask, and it puts these HR professionals in an ethical and legal bind, because that's not what they are there for. Take that information, take it to a registered investment advisor or a certified financial planner or an AFC or a CPA. Take that information to the right people to get the right information, okay? So a registered investment advisor is a licensed and certified financial professional, could be a CFP or other designee, who has registered with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission as being a fiduciary. They're fulfilling and meeting additional requirements for oversight by the SEC. So take that information, get the right advice, and make sure that it's tailored to your needs. And make sure that you are interviewing at least 3 professionals, so that way you figure out, do they align with your values, do they understand what your needs are, and are they going to educate you? Okay, there are some resources that you should be aware of. Sometimes we might get behind on our ability to manage our expenses and pay for what our needs are. So if you have so much debt, this does happen, if you have so much debt that it's interfering with your ability to live and actually pay for your regular expenses, I would strongly suggest that you reach out to the National Foundation for Credit Counseling to get free credit counseling and perhaps get on a debt management plan that will allow you to get debt-free within 3 to 5 years. They negotiate lower interest rates and payments on your behalf. You can find them at nfcc.org. If you want to find an accredited financial counselor like me for some financial counseling and coaching. We specialize in many different areas, including helping people map cash flow and do it on a consistent basis. You can reach out to findinafc.org. Remember that you're going to need to figure out what your retirement benefits are, so go to the Social Security Administration's website. You also want to make sure you understand your different Medicare options based on your retirement lifestyle. So there are going to be certain options that are better for you if you're going to be traveling overseas versus staying domestically. You can do that through shiphelp.org. If you need a financial professional, you can find some fee-only financial advisors by going to the XY Planning Network or the Garrett Planning Network. And remember, we talked about interviewing these professionals. You can also check out their background. So you can do that through two different sites. One is adviserinfo.sec.gov or investor.gov. The other one is through the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, that's FINRA. You can do what's called a broker check, and that's at brokercheck.finra.org to check out the professional that you may end up hiring. Lastly, I wanted to say thank you. You've done a great job of paying attention. Hopefully this information has helped you, and I want you to keep learning, earning, and growing. So remember to make informed financial decisions, and I promised you that I was going to give you information on how to download some free resources. So there is a shared Google Drive with free downloadable material. You can find it at tinyurl.com/talk-money-material. And all of that content is sorted by topic in various folders. If you want to check out more videos, feel free to go to YouTube at Talk Money Sense. Thank you so much for your time.